The 71st night. The following night Scheherazade said, I heard, O happy king, that the young man said, O commander of the faithful, the murdered girl was my wife and the mother of my children. She was my cousin, the daughter of this old man, my uncle, who gave her to me in marriage when she was still a young virgin. We lived together for 11 years, during which time God blessed her, and she bore me 3 sons. She was well behaved toward me, and served me exceedingly well, and I in turn loved her very much. On the first day of this month she fell gravely ill, and kept getting worse, but I took great care of her, until by the end of the month she slowly began to recover. One day, before going to the bath, she said to me, Husband, I want you to satisfy a desire of mine. I replied, I hear and obey, even if it were 1,000 desires. She said, I have a craving for an apple. If I could only smell it and take a bite, I wouldn't care if I die afterward. I replied, it shall be done. Then I went and looked for apples, but could not find any anywhere in your whole city. Had I found any, I would have paid a dinar for one. Vexed at my failure to satisfy her craving, I went home and said, Wife, I was unable to find any apples. She was upset, and, being still ill, suffered a relapse that night. As soon as it was morning, I went out and made the rounds of the orchard, one by one, but found no apples anywhere. At last a very old gardener answered my inquiry, saying, Son, no apples can be found, except in the orchard of the commander of the faithful in Basra, where they are stored by the gardener. I went home, and, driven by my love and solicitude for her, I prepared myself for the journey. For 2 full weeks, O commander of the faithful, I journeyed day and night, returning finally with 3 apples I had bought from the gardener for 3 dinars. But when I handed them to her, she showed no pleasure in them, but laid them aside. Then she suffered another relapse, lay ill, and made me worried about her for 10 days. One day, as I sat in my shop, buying and selling fabrics, I suddenly saw an ugly black slave, as tall as a reed and as broad as a bench, passing by. He was holding in his hand one of the 3 apples for which I had journeyed for half a month. I called after him, saying, My good slave, where did you get this apple? He replied, I got it from my mistress, for I went to see her today, and found her lying ill with 3 apples by her side. She told me her pimp of a husband had journeyed for half a month to bring them. After I ate and drank with her, I took one of the apples with me. When I heard what he said, O commander of the faithful, the world turned black before my eyes. I locked up my shop and went home, mad with resentment and fury. When I got home and looked for the apples, I found only 2, and when I asked her, Wife, where is the other apple? She raised her head and replied, By God, husband, I don't know. This convinced me that the slave had told the truth, and I took a sharp knife and, stealing behind her silently, knelt on her breast, worked the knife into her throat, and cut off her head. Then I quickly placed her in a basket, covered her with a woman's cloak, placed a piece of carpet on top of it, and sealed the basket. Then I placed the basket inside a chest, carried it on my head, and threw it into the Tigris. For God's sake, O commander of the faithful, avenge her on me, and hang me quickly, or I will call you to account on her behalf, before the Almighty God. For when I threw her into the river and went home, I found my oldest son crying, and when I asked him, What is the matter with you? He replied, O father, this morning I stole one of the 3 apples you had brought back for my mother. I took it and went to the market, and as I was standing with my brothers, a tall black slave came by and snatched it from my hand. I protested, saying, For God's sake, good slave, this is one of the apples for which my father journeyed for half a month to Basra, to bring back to my mother who was ill. Don't get me into trouble. But he paid no attention to me, and when I begged him for a second and a third time, he slapped me and went off with it. Scared of my mother, I went with my brothers outside the city, and we stayed there in fear until it started to get dark. For God's sake, father, say nothing to her of this, or her illness will get worse. When I heard my son's words, and saw him trembling and weeping, O commander of the faithful, I realized that I had killed my wife wrongfully, and that she had died unjustly. The accursed slave, hearing about the apples from my son, had slandered her and lied about her. When I realized that, I wept and made my son weep with me. And when this old man, my uncle and her father, came in, I related to him what had happened, and he wept and made us weep with him till midnight. And for 3 days afterward we mourned for her, and grieved over her unjust death, and all because of that black slave. This is the story of the murdered girl. So by your fathers and forefathers, I beg you to avenge your unjust death on me, and kill me for my mistake, for I have no life left after her. When the Caliph heard his words. But morning overtook Shahrazad, and she lapsed into silence. The 72nd night. The following night Shahrazad said, I heard, O happy king, that when the Caliph heard the young man's story, he was very much amazed, and said, By God, I will hang none but the accursed slave, and I will do a deed that will quench the thirst for vengeance, and please the glorious king. Then he said to Ja'far, Go into the city, and bring me the slave, or I will strike your neck. Ja'far left in tears, saying to himself, There is no escape from death this time, for the jar cannot be saved every time, but the all-powerful and omnipotent God, who saved me the first time, may save me yet a second time. By God, I will stay home for 3 days, until God's will is accomplished. He stayed home the first day, and the second, and by noon of the third day, giving himself up for lost, Ja'far summoned the judge and witnesses, and made his will. Then he called his children to him, bade them farewell and wept. Soon a messenger from the Caliph arrived, saying, The Caliph is in great rage, and he swears that this day shall not pass before you are hanged. Ja'far wept, and made all his slaves and members of his household weep for him. After he bade his children and all the members of his household farewell, his little daughter, who was very pretty, and whom he loved more than all the others, came up to him, and he embraced her and kissed her, as he wept at parting from his family and his children. But as he embraced her to comfort her, pressing her hard to his aching heart, he felt something round in her pocket. He asked her, My little girl, what is in your pocket? And the little one replied, It is an apple, with the name of our Lord, the Caliph, written on it. Rayhan, our slave, brought it, but he would not let me have it until I gave him 2 dinars for it. When Ja'far heard her mention the apple and the slave, he shrieked, and, putting his hand in her pocket, took out the apple, and, recognizing it, cried out, O speedy deliverer! Then he bade the slave be brought before him, and when the slave came, Ja'far said, Damn you, Rayhan! Where did you get this apple? The slave replied, Although a lie may save a man, the truth is better and safer. By God, my lord, I did not steal this apple from your palace, or from the palace of the commander of the faithful, or from his gardens. 4 days ago, as I was walking through one of the alleys of the city, I saw some children at play, and when one of them dropped this apple, I beat him and snatched it from him. He cried and said to me, Kind gentleman, this apple belongs to my mother, who is ill. She had told my father that she had a craving for apples, and she journeyed for half a month to Basra, and brought her back 3 apples, of which I stole this one. Give it back to me. But I refused to give it back to him. Instead, I brought it here and sold it to my little lady for 2 dinars. This is the story of the apple. When Ja'far heard these words, he marveled at the story and at the discovery that the cause of all the trouble turned out to be none other than one of his own slaves. He rejoiced and, taking the slave by the hand, led him before the Caliph and related to him the whole story from beginning to end. The commander of the faithful was greatly astonished and laughed until he fell on his back. Then he asked Ja'far, Do you mean to tell me that this slave of yours is the cause of all the trouble? Ja'far replied, Yes, O commander of the faithful. Seeing that the Caliph was greatly struck by the coincidence of the story, Ja'far said to the commander of the faithful, Do not marvel at the story, for it is not as amazing as the story of the 2 viziers, Nur al-Din Ali al-Misri and Badr al-Din Hassan al-Basri. The Caliph asked, O my vizier, is the story of these 2 viziers truly more amazing than this one? Ja'far replied, Yes, it is more amazing and more extraordinary, but I will not relate it to you, save on one condition. Eager to hear the story, the Caliph said, Come on, my vizier, and let me hear it. If it is indeed more amazing than the events we have just witnessed, I will pardon your slave, but if it is not, I will kill him. Come on, tell me what you know. Jafar said, The Story of the Two Viziers, Nur al-Din Ali al-Misri and Badr al-Din Hassan al-Basril. I heard, O Commander of the Faithful, that a long time ago there lived in the province of Egypt a just, trusted, kind, generous, courageous, and powerful king, who associated with the learned and loved the poor. He had a wise, experienced, and influential vizier, who was careful, cautious, and skilled in the affairs of the state. This vizier, who was a very old man, had two sons, who were like two moons or two lovely deer in their perfect elegance, beauty, and grace. The elder was called Shams al-Din Muhammad, the younger Nur al-Din Ali. The younger surpassed his brother in beauty. Indeed, in his day, God had created none more beautiful. One day, as it had been foreordained, their father the vizier died, and the king mourned him, and summoned the two sons, bestowed on them robes of honor and other favors, and said, You shall take your father's place, and be joint viziers of Egypt. They kissed the ground before him, and withdrew, and for a full month they performed the ceremonial mourning for their father. Then they assumed their position, taking turns, each performing his duty for a week at a time, and each accompanying the king on one journey at a time. The two lived in the same house, and their word was one. It happened that one night, before the elder brother was to set out on a journey with the king the next morning, the two brothers sat chatting. The elder brother said, Brother, I wish that you and I would marry two sisters, draw our marriage contracts on the same day, and go in to our wives on the same night. Nur al-Din replied, Brother, do as you wish, for this is an excellent idea. But let us wait until you come back from your journey, and with God's blessing we shall seek two girls in marriage. The elder brother said to Nur al-Din, Tell me, brother, if you and I perform our wedding on the same day, and consummate our marriage on the same night, and if your wife and mine conceive on our wedding night, and at the end of their pregnancy give birth on the same day, and if your wife gives birth to a boy, and my wife to a girl, tell me, will you marry your son to my daughter? Nur al-Din replied, Yes, brother Shams al-Din, adding, But what dowry will you require from my son for your daughter? The elder brother replied, I will take at least 3,000 dinars, 3 orchards, and 3 farms, in addition to an amount specified in the contract. Nur al-Din replied, Brother Shams al-Din, why such an excessive dowry? Are we not brothers, and is not each of us a vizier who knows his obligations? It behooves you to offer your daughter to my son without a dowry, for the male is worthier than the female, but you treat me like the man who said to another who came to ask for help, Very well, I will help you, but wait till tomorrow, prompting the other to repeat the following verses. When one postpones the favor for a day, the wise man knows that he has answered, Nay. Shams al-Din said, Enough of your comments. Damn you for comparing your son to my daughter, and thinking that he is worthier than she. By God, you lack understanding and wisdom. You say that we are partners in the vizierate, without realizing that I let you share it with me, only in order to spare your feelings by letting you assist me. By God, I will never marry my daughter to your son, not even for her weight in gold. I will never marry her to your son and have him for a son-in-law, not even if I have to suffer death. When Nur al-Din heard his brother's words, he became very angry and asked, Will you indeed not marry your daughter to my son? Shams al-Din replied, No, I will never consent to that, for he is not worth even a paring of her nail. Were I not on the eve of a journey, I would make an example of you, but when I come back, I will show you how I will vindicate my honor. Nur al-Din's anger grew so great that he was beside himself with rage, but he did what he felt, while the brothers sulked, and the two spent the night far apart, each full of wrath against the other. As soon as it was morning, the king went to the pyramids, accompanied by the vizier Shams al-Din, whose turn it was to go with him. When Shams al-Din departed, Nur ad-Din got up, still full of anger, opened his treasure chamber and, taking gold only, filled a small saddlebag. He recalled how his brother had scolded him and insulted him, and he recited the following verses. Travel, and new friends will succeed the friends you lost, and toil, for life's sweets do through toil come. To stay, wins you no honor, nor from exile saves. Set out to roam the world and leave your home. When water stands, in stagnant turns and stinks, but tastes so sweet when it does flow and run. And if the sun stood in its orbit still, both Arabs and barbarians would tire of the sun. And if the full moon did not wane and set, no watchful eyes would the moon's rising mark. If in the lair the lion stayed, in the bow the dart, neither would catch the prey or hit the mark. Deep in the mine gold dust is merely dust, and in its native ground fuel aloud. Gold, when extracted, grows much in demand, and when exported, alu fetches gold. When he finished reciting these verses, he ordered one of his pages to saddle his Arabian she-mule with her sturdy saddle and saddlecloth. She was a particularly fine riding animal, with dappled grey skin, ears like sharp reed pens, and legs like pillars. He ordered the page to saddle her with all her trappings, to place the saddlebags on her back, and to cover them with a soft sheet of silk carpeting. Then he said to his pages and slaves, I am leaving the city on an excursion in the vicinity of Kalyubia, to divert myself for a night or two, for I've been very depressed lately. Let none of you follow me. Then he took some provisions, mounted the she-mule, and, leaving Cairo, entered the desert. At midday, he reached a town called Bilbis, where he dismounted to rest and have something to eat. Then he took some food for himself and forage for his she-mule, and left the town, and, spurring his she-mule, fared forth in the desert. By nightfall, he reached the town of Al-Saidiya, where he dismounted to spend the night at the post station. He walked the she-mule 7 or 8 times, then gave her some fodder to eat, and, after he himself ate some food, he spread the carpet he had used for a seat, placing the saddlebag under his head, lay down, still seething with anger, saying to himself, By God, I will ride on, even if I wander as far as Baghdad. In the morning he resumed his journey, and, chancing to meet a courier, O commander of the faithful, he accompanied him on his she-mule, stopping whenever the courier stopped, and riding whenever he rode, until God granted him safe passage, and he reached the city of Basra. It happened that as he approached the outskirts of the city, the vizier of Basra was also travelling on the same road, and when the vizier overtook him, and saw that he was a handsome and well-mannered young man, he drew near him, greeted him, and inquired about his situation. Nur al-Din Ali told the vizier about himself, and said, I quarrelled with my family, and pledged myself not to go back until I visit all the countries of the world, even if I perish and meet my end before I achieve my aim. When the vizier of Basra heard his words, he said to him, O my son, do not go any further, for most of the regions are waste, and I fear for your safety. Then he took Nur al-Din Ali home with him, and treated him with kindness and generosity, for he was beginning to feel great affection for him. Then the vizier said to him, O my son, I am a very old man, whom God has never blessed with a son, but I have a daughter who is your equal in beauty. Many wealthy and eminent men have asked for her hand, but I have rejected them all. But since I have affection for you, will you accept my daughter as your wife, and maid, and be a husband to her? If you marry her, I will go to the king and tell him that you are like a son to me, and I will advance your cause and make you vizier in my place, so that I may be able to stay at home and rest. For by God, son, I am advanced in years, and I am weary and worn out. You shall be a son to me, and shall have control over my possessions, and over the vizierate in the province of Basra. When Nur al-Din heard the vizier's words, he bowed his head a while, then finally looked up and said, I hear and obey. The vizier was overjoyed, and he bade his servants prepare food and sweets, and decorate the large hall used for wedding feasts, and they at once did as he bade. Then he gathered his friends, and invited the prominent and the wealthy men of Basra, and when they were all assembled, he said, I have a brother, who is the vizier of Egypt. He has been blessed with a son, and I, as you know, have been blessed with a daughter. When his son and my daughter reached the age of marriage, he sent his son to me, and now I would like to draw their marriage contract, so that he may consummate his marriage here. After the wedding, I shall prepare him for the journey and send him back with his wife. They replied, This is an excellent idea, and a happy and praiseworthy plan. May God crown your good fortune with happiness, and may he keep your course blameless. But morning overtook Shahrazad, and she lapsed into silence. The 73rd night. The following night Shahrazad said, I heard, O happy king, that Jafar said to the Caliph, The prominent men of Basra said, May God keep your course blameless. Then the witnesses arrived, and the servants brought the tables and laid out the banquet, and the guests ate until they were satisfied, and when the sweets were offered, they enjoyed their fill. Then the servants cleared the table, and the witnesses came forward and signed the marriage contract, and when the incense rose, the guests departed. Then the viziers ordered his servants to take Nur al-Din Ali al-Misri to the bath, and sent him a full attire worthy of a king, as well as towels, incense, and whatever he needed. A little later, Nur al-Din came back from the bath, looking like the full moon, or the rising sun, like him of whom the poet said, The scent is musk, the cheek a rose, the teeth are pearls, the mouth is wine, the frame a buff, the hip a barge, the hair is night, the face a moon divine. He went in to his father-in-law and kissed his hand, and the vizier stood up to greet him, treated him with respect, and seated him beside him. Then, turning to him, he asked, Son, I would like you to tell me why you left your family, and how it is that they allowed you to depart. Hide nothing from me, and tell me the truth, for it is said, Be truthful, even though the truth may torment you with hellish fire, and please the Lord, and not his slaves, in order to avoid his ire. I wish to take you to the king, and let you have my position. When Nur al-Din heard what his father-in-law said, he replied, O great vizier and mighty lord, I am not of humble origin, nor did I leave my family with their consent. My father was a vizier, and he told him about what happened after his father died, and about the dispute between himself and his brother, but there's no point in repeating the story, adding, Finally, you were kind and gracious to me, and you married me to your daughter. This is my story. When the vizier heard Nur al-Din's story, he was amazed and said with a smile, My son, you quarreled even before getting married and having children. Now, son, go in to your wife, and tomorrow I shall take you to the king and acquaint him with our case, and I hope that God will grant you every blessing. It so chanced, as God had willed and ordained, that on the very same night on which Nur al-Din consummated his marriage in Basra, his brother Shams al-Din Muhammad consummated his own marriage to a girl in Egypt. This is how it came about. It is related that Jafar said to the Caliph, I heard that at the time Nur al-Din set out from Egypt, his elder brother Shams al-Din journeyed with the king of Egypt, and they were absent for a month. When they returned, the king went to his palace, while Shams al-Din went home, and when he looked for his brother and could not find him, he asked his servants and was told, O our lord, no sooner had the sun risen on the very morning you set out on your journey than he was already far away. He said that he would stay away for a night or two, but we have not heard from him ever since. When he heard what they said, he felt very sorry to lose his brother, and said to himself, He must have run away, and I must pursue him, even to the remotest corners of the land. Then he sent couriers after Nur al-Din, who had already reached Basra. When the couriers reached Aleppo, but heard no news about Nur al-Din and returned empty-handed, Shams al-Din despaired of finding him, and said to himself, There is no power and no strength, save in God the Almighty, the Magnificent. I went too far in quarreling with him over the marriage. Some time later, the Almighty God willed that Shams al-Din should seek in marriage the daughter of one of the merchants of Cairo, that he should draw up the marriage contract on the very same day that his brother drew up his in Basra, and that he should consummate his marriage on the very same night that his brother consummated his own with the vizier's daughter in Basra. So the Almighty and glorious God, in order that his decree over his creatures be fulfilled for a purpose of his own, let it come to pass, O Commander of the Faithful, that these two brothers drew up the marriage contracts on the very same day and consummated their marriages on the very same night, one in Cairo and the other in Basra. Subsequently, the wife of Shams al-Din Muhammad, the vizier of Egypt, gave birth to a girl, and the wife of Nur ad-Din Ali al-Misri, the vizier of Basra, gave birth to a boy who put to shame both the moon and sun. He had a neck as white as marble, a radiant brow, and rosy cheeks, and on the right cheek he had a mole like a disk of ambergris. He was like one of whom the poet said, "Here is a slender youth, whose hair and face, all mortals envelop with light and gloom. Mark on his cheek the mark of charm and grace, a dark spot on a red anemone." That child, who had a figure as slender as a bow, was endowed by God with beauty, charm, and perfect grace, so that he captured the heart with his loveliness and captivated the mind with his perfection. He was so faultless in character and looks that the deer stole from him their necks and eyes and every other grace. He was like him of whom the poet said, "With him to make compare beauty they brought, but beauty hung his head in abject shame. They said, 'O beauty, have you seen his like?' Beauty replied, 'I have never seen the same.'" Nur al-Din Ali named him Badr al-Din Hassan, and his grandfather, the vizier of Basra, he rejoiced in him, and gave banquets in his honor, and distributed presents worthy of kings. One day the vizier took Nur ad-Din Ali, the vizier of Egypt, with him and went up to the king. When Nur al-Din entered before the king, he kissed the ground before him, and repeated the following verses, for he was a cultivated, intelligent, generous, and gentle man. "May you long live in glory, night and day, and may eternal bliss attend your way." The king thanked Nur al-Din for the compliment, and asked his vizier, "Who is this young man with you?" And the vizier repeated Nur al-Din's story from beginning to end, adding, "O king, I would like my lord Nur al-Din to take my place as vizier, for he is an eloquent man, and I, your slave, have become a very old man, weak in body and mind. As a favor, in consideration of my service to your majesty, I beg you to appoint him vizier in my place, for he is more qualified than I." And he kissed the ground before the king. When the king looked at Nur al-Din, the vizier of Egypt, and scrutinizing him, he was pleased with him, and took a liking to him. So he granted the vizier's request, bestowed on Nur al-Din a full robe of honor, presented him with one of his best she-mules, and allotted him stipends and allowances. Then Nur al-Din and his father-in-law went home, feeling happy and saying to each other, "The newborn Hassan has brought us good fortune." The next day Nur al-Din went up to the king, and, sitting in the vizier's seat, carried out all the usual duties of viziers, signing, instructing, judging, and granting, for nothing was beyond him. And the king took him into favor. Then Nur ad-Din Ali al-Misri went home, happy and pleased with his position as vizier and with the powers and favors the king had bestowed on him. The days and nights went by, and he continued to raise and rejoice in his son Badr al-Din Hassan, who grew and thrived, becoming ever more beautiful and charming. When the boy was 4 years old, his grandfather, the old vizier, his mother's father, fell ill and willed all his wealth to him, and when the grandfather died, they mourned him and gave banquets for a whole month. Nur al-Din continued to be vizier of Basra, as his son Badr al-Din continued to grow and thrive. When he was 7 years old, Nur al-Din entered him in a school and charged the tutor to take care of him, saying, "Take care of this boy, and give him a good education, and teach him good manners. At school, everybody was as pleased with Badr al-Din as could be, for he was intelligent, perceptive, sensible, well-mannered, and articulate, and for 2 full years under his tutor's guidance he continued to read and learn. But morning overtook Shahrazad, and she lapsed into silence. The 74th night. The following night Shahrazad said, I heard, O king, that Jafar said to the Caliph, By the time Badr al-Din was 12 years old, he had learned to read and write the Arabic language, as well as calligraphy, mathematics, and jurisprudence. Furthermore, the Almighty God had bestowed on his fine figure the robe of beauty, charm, and perfect grace, so that he was like the one of whom the poet eloquently said, In perfect beauty he vies with the moon, in his fine figure with the slender bow. The sun sets in his cheeks' anemones, the rising moon shines in his radiant brow. All grace is his, as if he does the earth, with beauty from his boundless grace endow. Yet while he was growing up, he never ventured into the city, until one day his father Nur al-Din Ali had him fully attired, placed him on a she-mule, and went with him through the city, on his way to the king. When the people looked at him and saw his face, they invoked God to save his beauty from harm, raising their voices in prayer for him and his father, as they crowded around him to look at his beauty, charm, and perfect grace. From that time on, he rode with his father every day, and everyone who saw him marveled at his loneliness, for he was like the one of whom the poet said, When he appeared, they said, May he be blessed, and glory to the God who fashioned such a one. Above all lovely men, he was the king, and they his subject all, excepting none. The nectar of his mouth tasted so sweet, and like a row of pearls his white teeth shone. He garnered all the beauty of the world, leaving all mortals helpless and undone, and on his cheeks beauty for all to see, proclaimed, No one is beautiful but he. He bent coquettishly like a willow bow, and his cheeks resembled roses and anemones. With sweet speech and a smile so radiant as to put the full moon to shame, he was the lover's trial and delight. When he reached the age of 20, his father, Nur al-Din Ali, having grown feeble, summoned him and said, Son, you should know that this world is temporary, while the next is eternal. I wish to instruct you in what I have learned and understood. I have 5 admonitions for you. Then he recalled his home and country and, thinking of his brother Shams al-Din, began to weep over his separation from those he loved and from his distant home, and as passion raged within him, he sighed deeply and repeated the following verses. I blame you and proclaim my ardent love. My body is here, my heart with you still. I did not wish to leave you, but our fate, and God's decree defeated human will. When he finished reciting the verses and stopped weeping, he said to his son, Son, before I give you advice, you should know that you have an uncle who is vizier in Egypt, and whom I have left without his consent, as it had been foreordained. Then he took a roll of paper, and wrote down what had happened between him and his brother before his departure. Then he wrote down what had happened to him in Basra, and how he had become a vizier, recording the date of the day on which he got married and the night on which he consummated the marriage, noting that he was less than 40 years old on the day of the quarrel. He concluded by stating that this was his letter to his brother, whom he commanded to God's care. Then he folded and sealed the scroll, saying, O Hassan, my son, keep the scroll and don't ever part with it. Hassan took it and hid it by sewing it into the skull cap of his turban, while his eyes filled with tears for parting from his father, who was entering the throes of death. But a while later his father opened his eyes and said, O Hassan, my son, my first advice is that you should not mix or associate with anyone. If you do not, you will avoid trouble, for safety is in keeping aloof. I have heard the poet say, There is no man whose friendship you can trust. nor is there true friend in adversity. Then live alone, and lean for help on none. Let this advice of mine your lesson be. Second, O my son, oppress no one, lest fortune oppress you, for fortune is for you one day, but against you another, and its gift are alone to be repaid. I have heard the poet say, be careful, and restrain your hasty wish. Be merciful to all, and they will mercy show. The hand of God is above every hand, and every tyrant shall another know. Third, hold your tongue, and let your faults distract you from the faults of others. Preserve silence, for it is said, in silence safety. I have heard the poet say, silence is fair, safe taciturnity. So if you speak, do not a babbler be. For if your silence may once bother you, your uttered words you will forever rue. Fourth, O my son, beware of drinking wine, for wine is the root of all evil, because it robs man of reason. Beware, beware of drinking wine. I've heard the poet say, I've all wine forsworn, and joined its many detractors, for wine leads man astray, and opens all the evil doors. Last, O my son, protect your wealth, so that it may protect you, and watch over it, so that it may watch over you. Do not squander your substance, lest you become dependent on the meanest of men, and guard your money, for money is a salve. I have heard the poet say, when my wealth dwindles, all friends disappear. When it increases, all are friends to me. How many men for money were my friends, and when it went, how many left my company? Follow my advice. He continued to exhort his son until his soul left his body. Then they burned incense around him and buried him. But morning overtook Shahrazad, and she lapsed into silence. Then Dinarzad said, Sister, what an entertaining story! Shahrazad replied, what is this, compared with what I shall tell you tomorrow night, if I stay alive? The 75th night. The following night Dinarzad said, O sister, tell us the rest of the story. Shahrazad replied with the greatest pleasure. It is related, O king, that Jafar said to the caliph, after the vizier died, his son Badr al-Din sat in mourning for 2 full months, without riding out or attending on the king, until the king finally grew angry at him, summoned one of his chamberlains and made him vizier. Then he bade the vizier take chamberlains and envoys, seize the asset of the deceased vizier Nur al-Din Ali, confiscate all his money, and seal up all his houses, goods, and possessions, without leaving a penny. The new vizier took with him chamberlains, envoys, guards, clerks, and treasury inspectors, and proceeded to the house of the vizier Nur al-Din Ali. It happened that there was among the troops a man who had been one of the Mamluks of the vizier Nur al-Din Ali, and when he heard this order, he spurred his horse and hurried to Badr al-Din Hassan. He found him sitting at the gate of his house, with downcast head and broken heart. He dismounted and, kissing his hand, said, O my lord and son of my lord, hurry up before death catches up with you. Badr al-Din Hassan trembled and asked, What is the matter? The Mamluk replied, The king is angry with you. He has ordered your arrest, and calamity is behind me on its way to you. Run for your life, and don't fall into their hands, for they will not spare you. Badr al-Din Hassan was terribly alarmed, and he paled and asked, Brother, is there time for me to go into the house? The Mamluk replied, No, my lord, rise this instant and flee your house. Badr al-Din rose, repeating the following verses. If you suffer injustice, save yourself, and leave the house behind to mourn its builder. Your country you replace by another, but for yourself you'll find no other self. Nor without a mission trust another man, for none is as loyal as you yourself. And did the lion not struggle by himself, he would not prowl with such a mighty mane. He put on his shoes, and, covering his head with the hem of his outer robe, left in confusion, full of anxiety and fear, not knowing where he was proceeding or in which direction he was heading. At last he decided to go to his father's sepulchre, and as he made his way among the tombs, he let fall from his head the hem of his outer robe, which was adorned with bands of brocaded taffeta embroidered with the following lines in gold. You, who with the dew and stars do with face so radiant vie, may your fortune stay the same, and your glory ever high. As he was walking, he met a Jew on his way to the city. He was a money changer carrying a basket, and when he saw Badr al-Din, he greeted him. But morning overtook Shahrazad, and she lapsed into silence. Then Dinarzad said, "What an entertaining story!" Shahrazad replied, "What is this, compared with what I shall tell you if I live?"